welcome to the Racing Nuggets podcast. I'm PJ Noodleman. My co-host Dan Plan is currently predisposed, and he's actually helping with a stream of a race tonight, so he's not here. But I am excited to chat with this gentleman tonight. I've known him for a while during my time when I worked at Wehrs Machine, specifically during that time, but Dick Johnson joins us for this episode. And Dick, you have like 43 plus years in racing, and you've had a lot of different roles over the years. But I really want to know, how did you first get involved in racing? What was your first exposure to it?
Well, racing itself, the first race I ever went to was in 1952 at the Southside Speedway. My dad took me down there because it was run by the American Legion, and my dad was a member of that. We took the back seat out of our 50 Chevy and set it on the hillside and watched the race. And that's really all I remember. Is I don't really remember the race, but I just remember my dad carrying that seat.
That's cool. That's a really neat memory. How old were you about then?
5.
5. Wow. So was your dad then obviously the one that kind of introduced you to racing? Is that how it all happened?
Well, inadvertently, he was just there to support the American Legion, and then he realized that I kind of liked that, so he took me to a few things. We went to Road America in the '60s for June sprints a couple times, and saw some races at the Minnesota Fair when it was still dirt.
Wow.
The sprint cars would go down the backstretch, and the rooster tail was like 20, 30 feet in the air.
So you like dirt, asphalt, it doesn't matter. You just love racing in general.
Yep.
I love that.
When I was a kid, we would go down to the Crosse Speedway on our bikes, sneak in through the woods and watch the races. And Chuck and Kenny Smith, their shop was in Onalaska, right behind the First Lutheran Church, and they go over there and hang out and watch them work on their cars, and thought that was so cool.
That
'Cause
is cool.
I knew nothing about mechanics, so
So did you ever race yourself?
I never raced and never worked on a car, other than I painted some lettering on a car a couple of times, but that really doesn't count. I only drove a race car one time, and that was Larry had that 69 Chevelle that was fixed up to look like Dave Marcus and Jim Sauter's car. So we had a press day at West Salem one time where we invited the press to come up and drive the car for a few laps, and then I jumped in it and drove a few laps, and it just seemed to me like it was so noisy and so bumpy that I don't think I was going very fast. White knuckling it.
That's pretty cool. You say Larry, that's Chad's dad, Larry Wehrs, right?
Correct.
So you worked actually with him for a lot of your years in racing, right?
Right.
And you were a scorer, public relations, race director. You've wore a lot of hats in a bunch of different roles. What was your favorite role?
Well, I mean, being the race director was, I suppose, the most challenging because you're putting on a show for the public and you don't want to do it wrong. Worked a lot organizing the Oktoberfest races each year once I got working there. And that took a lot of time, in the month of September to get all that. And we weren't even as big time as it is now when the Dearys and the McCarns are running it.
That is a lot of work. I don't think people realize just how much work goes into preparing for a big race, let alone even a regular Saturday night race. There's a lot of prep work, isn't there?
Yes, and one of the things we didn't have back then was cell phones with radar on it, so you never knew what the weather was going to do until it got there. But
Right.
on iffy days, I can remember at the Dells, the phone would ring at 8 o'clock in the morning, and people would say, "What time are you going to call?" Well, we're not going to call them until it rains.
Right. Yeah.
But they were coming from a long ways, and you're kind of in no man's land there. No matter what you do is going to be wrong.
Do you have a memory from all of your years that just really sticks out, whether it was something with a racer or an event or something that just is something that you look back on and you just kind of smile and you're just really proud to have been a part of it?
Quite a few. I think one of the things that I did that maybe people don't know about is I was the one that started the after race parties at Oktoberfest in 1974. It was really cold. We had snow flurries on Sunday afternoons, and but that Saturday night after the races were over, I went out onto the fairgrounds, and by that time we had a fair amount of campers, and there must have been a half a dozen bonfires or so going, and people drinking, and we weren't smart enough to have firewood there, so that they started ripping boards off of the fairground buildings, and fairground wasn't happy about that. And I got to thinking, this exhibition hall is just sitting here empty. So why can't we get all of those people inside? I mean, there's no heat in there, but body heat's going to keep you warm and dry. And so in 75, we had a race party. And after I finished my paperwork up in the tower on Saturday night, I walked down there and I could barely get in the door because it was so packed.
Wow.
And they've been doing it ever since. And I think that was really the turning point between Oktoberfest being just another fall race and kind of the fall race.
So we have you to thank for all of the hangovers that everyone has.
Yeah, I suppose.
You are an artist too, and I don't think a lot of people realize that. You have a lot of original artwork that is really collectible now in a lot of the promotional pieces for several tracks. Have you always been artistic like that, or was that just a something you discovered after you got involved in racing?
I guess I always like to draw things. And when you're in this business, you kind of have to be self-sufficient. You can't just spend money on hiring other companies to do things that you could do yourself. So, I mean, I designed logos for the track and artwork for the ads. And one winter, I lettered up. We had a van that we used, or that I used, that had a race car painted on the side, and I spent the winter putting vinyl letters on it that I cut out by hand because I didn't really have the electronic way of cutting them back then. And
That's some heavy duty work to do that by hand and have it look good too. And I saw a picture of that. How long did it take you to do that van?
well, off and on a couple of months.
Wow. It looks great though. It really looked great.
Scissors and X-Acto knives. And
Well, you were really quite an asset to anybody that you helped out with all the multi-talented facets that you have.
well, I hope so. I mean, I suppose another thing I'm proud of is once I got into scoring the races, I I really made it a point for me to be impartial. Score what you see and not worry about who it is. I mean, I've been to tracks where I was up in a tower, like say you go with the Artco race, and they have their local cars they're filling in, and the local scorers would be cheering on certain drivers and wishing other drivers would crash if well, you can't do that.
Mm-mm.
So that when you have the right attitude, then other people notice that. So John McCarnes realized that, he could rely on me to be a scorer, and I scored for him for many years. I did a lot of work at the Rockford Speedway. I was hired for a couple of years to score a go-kart race at the Lacrosse Center. And I know over the years, every once in a while you get a driver who said, "Wow, you're just playing favorites." And especially I've had so many people over the year tell me, "Well, you just let Dick Trickle win." And I said, "Well, Dick Trickle doesn't need my help. He can he can win on his own."
Right. That has to be kind of cool to be able to look back and know that you were like right in the trenches working alongside all of the greats, right?
Those were that was just such a wonderful time. Uh, Here there was, I don't know, 6 or 8 guys that raced 5, 6, 7 days a week for a living. Where today they're at the short track level. I don't know if anybody does that around here anymore.
Yeah, it's a different era now. But boy, those are the days when you were right in the thick of everything. Those are the days that everybody refers to as the good old days of racing, right? And you were right there in the middle of it all. That's kind of cool. Do you have, and I know you just talked about needing to be impartial, but were there racers that you maybe were like, dang, that guy's got some talent and he's gonna go somewhere?
Well, there were quite a few, but I mean, obviously Dick Trickle had talent and he went somewhere. And the problem is there's a lot of them that had talent, but there's the next step up, there's not a whole lot of room. There's
Yeah.
room for one or two to move up.
What a time though to be involved with it. And with your artistic abilities, you really had to have been invaluable to Larry Wehrs and anybody else that you actually helped out with stuff. Um, you did the Dell's logo and you had the state of Wisconsin outline that was inset in there. That was your design and they kind of brought it back now, right?
Yeah, they just changed. Of course, they changed the name of the track from when we had it. It was the Dells Motor Speedway. Now it's the Dells what are they
Raceway
called?
Park or
Raceway Park.
yeah.
But other than that, it's pretty much the same.
That's kind of cool to look at that and know that that was your handiwork, huh?
I was kind of surprised when I saw that, but they have good taste, I guess I could say.
That's very true. Very true. What are some of the artistic pieces that you put together that you're most proud of?
Well, I should have brought some of that along. I worked back when in the day Heilemans was kind of the head control of the fairgrounds. And one of the things that they did at Oktoberfest time is they had posters printed up for us, and I did some artwork that went on those posters, and the track logo that was on the poster, and artwork for newspaper ads. I think I learned along the way that you put an ad, especially in a regular newspaper, not the racing paper, but if you're going to put an ad in your local newspaper, the ad's got to stick out. You just can't put in a bunch of letters that say, well, there's going to be a race Saturday night. You got to have something that catches their eye. And then once they got your eye, then they can read the details in the fine print. But I just didn't think that ads that just say Dill's Motor Speedway Saturday night was going to work. So I just tried to draw up stuff that would say, hey, look at me, look at my ad.
That's smart. You're very, again, valuable for a lot of folks in that regard. Do you still draw, Dick? Do you do much?
Not anymore. I doodle a lot, but that doesn't really count.
Well, sure it does. Are you still doodling race cars?
No, I just you sit around and just start drawing imaginary nothing, but sometimes it looks like something, and most of the time it's junk, but it's fun.
Now, you also did public relations too, so you ended up writing up a lot of the reports at the end of the night. I got to believe that you did more than just that. So you were probably maybe doing race director duty, and then did you write up the reports after that too?
Yeah.
Wow. How did that all work?
It was not a problem we had. I mean, I had my typewriter sitting right next to me. You run a heat race and you quick move over and fill in that. But back in those days, it was a little different. Now everything is done electronically, but we submitted our race results in paper. You mail it in. So,
Hmm. Has it been hard for you to see how times are changing, or are you fascinated by all the changes? Because you really were a craftsman, when it came to drawing the ads or doing that intensive labor to put something together that nowadays there's all kinds of tools. So, um, are you embracing all the different changes, or do you kind of miss the old days and the way things were?
well, I think the new stuff is fun. When in the 90s when I was working, so after in 91 was the last year that I was at the Dells, and then I spent most of the 90s with the Artco series. And I set there was a few things on I had a computer then. There's a few things. There was a drawing program in there, and I actually sat down and drew out the Artco logo so I could insert it into the race results document because I didn't know how to copy one and paste it, so I just drew one and it looked okay.
Nice. Do you miss those heydays? Going to the track like that all the time? What have you been doing with yourself these days?
Not much. I do like what retired people do. I sit home, watch TV, go for walks. I go to some races, and I'm also a railroad history buff, so I do a lot of that. Go to various uh, small conventions that on that subject, and I've written articles for it and given talks, and so it's
Nice.
just a different thing. I started riding trains in 1985 and just loved it. So that was kind of been my hobby to take train trips rather than driving or flying.
Probably a little more relaxing, I imagine, huh? Yeah.
And you just sit back and watch the scenery go by,
Nice.
go to the dining car and eat dinner with other people that you've never met before. And it's kind of fun.
I like your style, Dick. I like that you embrace some of the more classic ways, if you will, to do things. I think that's pretty cool. When you were really super involved in racing, did you have a favorite track that you really liked going to?
Hmm. Well, one of the things I had a kind of a part-time, wasn't an occupation, but I just did it for the fun of it. Since since I knew the people at the racing papers, Checkered Flag and Midwest, they would get me press credentials for the bigger races. So in this early spring and the late fall, when we were before our season was in progress, we'd go to some of those events, And then some of the closer ones like Michigan or Road America. So I took a lot of photos, but the track I liked to go to the most was North Wilkesboro. I just
Mm,
liked the racing there was, it was like short track racing instead of just cars going fast in a circle. They would really bump and grind there.
yeah.
And before they redesigned the track, I could just about stand right next to the edge of the track. It had one little guardrail between me and death.
Wow. So
And
did you get back to North Wilkesboro when they ran there here recently? Did you go down there for that one?
no, I haven't been there since they extended the pit road around turns 3 and 4, which is where I would always stand because
Mm.
I stood there, then the sun was to my back. So I didn't, so I could get decent photos. North Wilkesboro was interesting because they put on Sunday, excuse me, they put fans in the infield. Half of the infield was for the pits or the garage area, the other half was for fans, and they just drove cars and pickups in there, parked them bumper to bumper, door handle to door handle. So the first guy in is going to be the last guy out. And it was just so cool to see those people partying. But you stand on in turn 3 and you look over, and they had a garage building in turn 1 and 2, and you were above the roof of that building. The track was so slanted,
Wow.
and it doesn't really show up on TV like that, but
Downhill, what is it downhill the backstretch or uphill the backstretch then?
back stretch is uphill and the front stretch is downhill. So
Downhill. That's
turn
crazy.
1 is like way down in. So they just go zoom.
Makes you wonder if they were drinking when they designed it or they just didn't think about it too much.
Just the way the land was. And
I guess. I guess. You again, photographer is yet another thing that you added to your resume. But you also had a brief singing career. Is this correct?
well, in high school, some friends and I had a garage band that we worked on a little bit. Did a couple of high school dances, but and then after high school, there was a guy and his much younger wife came to town, and they wanted to kind of put on a Las Vegas type show. And they did that at the Cavalier when it was still a restaurant. And so she was a go-go dancer and a comedian. And they didn't want records because she wanted to be able to stop dancing. And her big thing was talking to the crowd and getting them to say goofy things. So they went to Leithold Music Store to ask if they knew of any musicians. And the boyfriend of my friend's sister worked there, and he recommended us. So here we are, two 19-year-old kids playing in this 21-year-old bar. And but it was the only regular music gig I ever had.
Well, what do you play? What instrument?
Uh,
Piano or
keyboards. Yeah.
keyboards? Okay. Dang, Dick, you are a Renaissance man. You have so many different talents.
That was just, well, I had piano lessons when I was a kid, and in high school, I had a band teacher that taught me how to play piano by ear instead of reading. So just so you could hear a song and just kind of knock it out after that.
Oh. You still play?
Very little.
Very little. Well, you have so many talents. I'm just impressed by everything that you can do. Your artwork, though, over the years, I think that's going to continue to live on forever and ever. I mean, a lot of that stuff is pretty classic that people collect now. And did you autograph any of that? I mean, did you put your name? You know how Chuck Deere used to always kind of put his daughter's name and his son's name and Holly's name in
Unfortunately,
there?
I wasn't smart enough to do that, I guess.
Well, I know anyway. You sent me some pictures, and I'm gonna kind of intersperse them into this podcast, at least the video portion, so people can kind of see your work. But that's really, I think, an underrated talent that you really brought to the table during a time when it was really well needed. Um, like you talk about, I mean, for an ad to stand out, it needed to really have some great graphics on it, and you hand drew all of that stuff. That just blows me away, and makes me proud to be able to say I know you too. You should pick up the pencil some more, I think.
I'll try. I use it a lot to play Sudoku. That's what us old people do.
So, who are some of your friends yet that you still stay in touch with from the heydays of racing?
Well, I have one friend that we've been going to races since high school, and right now he's got a little medical issue he's dealing with. So I hope that works out okay. Like last year, we went, for example, we went up to the nationals at Cedar Lake to been going to the Joe Shear race and a few others. So.
And maybe you can take a train and go down south and hit some of those big races down there too.
I don't think I ever want to go back to those. They become so big business and they're just not, to me, they're not as friendly as they were.
Hmm. Say more about that.
Well, back when I was going there, it was kind of laid back. I remember one time Larry Wehrs sent myself and another guy down to Orlando to bring back a couple of trucks that he bought at the auction. So on our way back, we stopped at the Atlanta Speedway. And on Sunday morning, we took one of the trucks, drove up to the back gate and drove right in, watched the race. Today, you'd have to pay hundreds or maybe even thousands of dollars for a motorhome parking spot, or you'd never get in there like that.
That's true.
And they're all that way. A friend of mine, Dean Strom, he worked a few races out at Watkins Glen as the track announcer. And they have parking there, $1,000 a spot for your motorhome. I mean,
That's nuts.
and if you have a
Wow.
car, you park out in a field somewhere and walk 2 miles to get to your seat.
Dang. You have really made a lot of connections too over the years. You talk about Dean. He's still very active with it, but you really do know a lot of people. Um, who have been some of the most influential people in your life in racing?
Well, obviously Larry Wehrs and John McCarnes, the Deary family. I'd like to say that I'm friends with Dave Marcus. I got to know Bobby Allison, even though it was under strange circumstances. That was kind of an interesting story because back in those days, Bobby Allison would fly his family up to La Crosse, like probably 3 times a year to use the medical facilities. And each time Larry would send a car down to the airport for him to drive. So on this night, he drove out to the Speedway just to watch. And when he got there, Mike Miller saw him. He says, I want you to drive my car tonight, see if you can get it to go better. So And lo and behold, uh, he ran it in the feature, and it was like a photo finish. Bobby Allison and Dick Trickle side by side, and of course we've got no transponders or anything like that. We had to call it by eye, and we called it in favor of Dick Trickle, and so now. And after that, every time we saw Bobby Allison, he would say, "Well, here comes the blind scorers."
Oh, funny. Funny, funny. Who are some other people that you've had some really great stories like that with? Because I just feel like you've known so many people in racing.
Well, I know the Osdicks that used to have the tracks up in the Twin Cities, and Bob Fredrickson had the tracks up in the Twin Cities, and um, Terry Tucker at Jefferson, and people at Kaukauna.
Mm.
Phil Bickley up at Wausau. He's quite a character. I knew Sam Bardis back in the day. He was really a character.
Well, tell us some of these character stories.
Well, Sam Bardis had he built the what was in the Capitol Super Speedway in Madison. He also had the tracks up in the Rapids, Griffith Park, and then Golden Sands. But Sam, he always had just a gaudy sport coat that he wore all the time, and so he looked like an old time promoter,
Nice.
almost like the guy you couldn't trust, but apparently they trusted him. But he was a nice guy. Anyway, Philip Bickley was just a go-getter. He never stopped moving, and he still is a go-getter up. He still helps him out up there.
Wow. Do you get up there much or not too often?
Well, I was up there for the tour race last summer. And well, I've been there several years in a row for that. I remember I went up for the Big 8 race the night before, and I go out there on Saturday morning, and here's Phil Bickley with a tractor, with a backhoe and a bucket on the front, and he's driving back and forth, crushing a pile of aluminum cans. I thought that was because when you're a race promoter, there's all kinds of duties. You're a plumber and you're an electrician and you're the janitor and you mow the grass, and that's just one more thing you have to do is take care of the
Yeah.
trash.
That's probably part of the reason why you became so valuable to people like Larry Wehrs because you are multi-talented in very functional ways for things that needed to get done around the racetrack.
And my
I can't get over how what an artist you are. That's just astounding to me. I didn't realize just how much of that you really did by hand.
well, my father had a home building business. It wasn't a huge one, but I started working for him when I was a kid, and so I knew about carpentry, and I knew something about plumbing, and I knew something about electrical. And on Saturday night when something goes wrong, you just can't call somebody. You gotta see if you could figure it out yourself. And even
What?
to hire somebody to do something for you, that costs money.
Oh yeah.
It's better if you can do it in-house.
What are some of the crises that you might remember that were averted by having to jump in and figure something out?
Oh, I don't know. I just can't really think of anything right now.
Did you ever have to break up a fight in the pits?
Well, I didn't do it, but because I was up in a tower, but I know we usually had Clem Drosty as the pit steward, so he had his hands full on many nights.
I'm sure. I'm sure. Who were some of your heroes growing up when you were still kind of a kid? Um, High school, whatever, that were like your heroes in racing. Did you have heroes back then that you kind of looked up to?
Well, locally we had, like I said, the Smith brothers and W. Anderson. They raced on the dirt at North Crosse, and then in 1966, North Crosse was reopened and paved, and then the CWRA guys were running there. And I think my favorite driver was Dave Fields because he had a convertible,
Wow.
and, and I thought that was kind of cool. And he was good. He'd win every once in a while.
Did
The
you
cra
ever do the painting on anybody's car for them or
I
the
did a
lettering?
couple. Uh, a friend of mine named Lad Huber raced at West Salem for 2 or 3 years, and I put the number and the lettering on his car just to help him out because he didn't have much of a budget. And the car didn't go very fast, but it was fun.
It looked good, right?
I think so.
Yeah. Did you ever put flames on anybody's car?
No, that's too much work.
I would probably agree with that as well too. Do you have a kind of a collection of some of your work that you've done over the years that you have hung on to then?
Oh yeah, I have a lot of stuff. Uh, I have like the a box with when I'm actually doing the original drawings.
Wow.
I said, you do it and then maybe you refine it and refine it again until you get it the way you want it.
And when you would draw those, Dick, were you just doing it from your head or were you looking at pictures?
Uh, a lot of it was just looking at pictures and trying to you have to find the right angle photo of the car in the position that you want it, and it just kind of draw it in black and white because to put ads in the newspaper, it's got to be either black or white. You don't have to worry about colors.
Well, that's actually, I think, a bigger challenge, right? I mean, if you want the picture to stand out and you know it's going to be black and white, you got to get really creative with what you're doing in that. So, I mean, to me, that's just another testament to your talent to have been able to do that. And I think back now too to some of the ads that I used to see, and now knowing that you were probably the one that designed them and drew them, that makes it even more special, I think.
I know I did one drawing. It was kind of cars swooping out of, say, turn 4 down the straightaway. And I put that in an ad, and then you start reading racing papers, and here you have tracks in other states that copied that into their ad. So maybe I should have put my name in there and
You probably should have.
trademarked it or something, but I guess so they must have thought it was worth having as well. So,
You were a trendsetter, Dick.
well, it's out of necessity more than anything else.
Yeah. So you mentioned Bobby Allison getting kind of owly a little bit, saying that you're the blind scorer. Have you had other people over the years that kind of got up in your face a little bit about how they might have thought they were ahead of somebody else?
Yeah, that happens. And again, you just have to, the one thing you don't do is try to get in an argument with them. You just try to talk calmly and directly and honestly and hope that they because in the heat of the battle, they're all fired up, and And of course, now I see those same people 10, 20 years later, and they just say, "Hi, Dick, how you doing?" And they barely remember that. It's
Oh
like
my
in
goodness.
sport, you see arguments, but then when the dust settles, they kind of I hope they realize that, that was my job and I wasn't trying to hurt anyone. I was just trying to be as fair and honest as I could. And
I
you're
go
doing
ahead.
it site, you don't have all of the electronic stuff. And I'm sure I made mistakes, but they were honest mistakes.
I admire that you really worked hard to stay unbiased, And actually scoring, I don't know if everybody realizes just how hard that is. I had to do it once for a racer at a race where before they had transponders, and that was stressful for me just to watch one car. I couldn't imagine having to watch a whole field. I don't know. I would have had high blood pressure, I think, if I had to do that every night.
I mean, I look back at it because I would go, especially when we'd go on the road with the Artco series and score 100 lap race all by myself. And I think, how is that possible?
Yeah, especially if you had to go to the bathroom. That's a good question, actually, Dick. What did you do if you had to go to the bathroom and you knew the race was coming up or it was already
Prepare
started?
ahead of time.
No peeing in a bucket for you?
Well, you go before the race starts.
Yeah, it's an amazing career that you have had. Um, and I don't think that you toot your horn very often, so I don't think a lot of people realize just how involved you were in so many different facets during the heyday of Wisconsin racing or Midwest racing in general. You really did have your fingers into a lot of different things.
I guess I don't know, for some reason I just wanted to be involved. And that was, you know, I knew I couldn't drive a race car and I knew I couldn't build one. So here's a way to be involved in this sport that I liked. And it kind of surprised me that I went from when I first got involved at the track in West Salem, I was just writing the race results because that was kind of an interesting story because I wrote a letter to Midwest Racing News during the winter between 71 and 72, wondering why some tracks like Madison and Slinger and Hales Corners and Kaukauna had these great big stories and photos. And the two tracks in La Crosse, because North La Crosse and West Salem were running, had these little wanted stories that had the top three finishers and nothing else. And I said, well, I mean, we don't have reporters. We rely on the track for the information, and that's all we were getting. And then they said, well, if you're that interested, why don't you go out and volunteer to help them out? So the first race of the season, I went out there in 72, and that's the year that Larry Wehrs went from being a partner in that operation to having it all to himself. And I didn't know the guy, but I found him and I told him my little story, and he said, okay, we'll give it a shot. And then I scored along myself just so I didn't have to bother his scores and I had something to write. And then one year, one of his scorers quit. And so Larry said, well, since you're doing that anyway, you might as well go help. And then after next year, another scorer quit. And all of a sudden, here I am, the head scorer and sort of the race director. Because initially, in those early days, the flagman ran the race because we didn't have communications other than had a landline, but you can't ring the phone during the race. So, and then once we managed to get a set of radios. I forget what year that was. And then And that's really when the race director in a tower started to be a thing, because now you've got a better view and you can talk to everybody. So that's what I was doing, scoring the race, scoring the races and kind of running the program. And
Wow. You were like right on the cusp of everything as it was really starting to develop. That's pretty cool.
I look back and how did I ever get to do that? It was just, things just fell into place.
Well, you were obviously very passionate about racing. I mean, that's pretty cool. And then when you think about that, that all goes back to when you were 5 years old, when your dad pulled the back seat out of the car and you all sat and watched the races on the South Speedway. Wow.
Yeah,
Did you?
it was a nice run, I think.
Yeah. Was your dad alive long enough to be able to see all of your talents really come to fruition?
Oh yeah, he for most of my he wasn't my dad wasn't that much of a race fan. He mostly went to a few races when I was a kid because I wanted to go, but he wasn't a race fan himself. So this was all, I mean, I don't I thought I think he kind of thought that this is kind of a goofy thing for me to be doing, but
Boy, you
because
turned it into a
certainly
career,
different than
though.
it's certainly different than what he did for a living. So
And what did he do?
he built houses.
Built houses, that's right. Well, he still must have been proud to see you kind of chase after your dreams and be able to scratch out a living for yourself doing what you're very passionate about.
I think so. It just my father wasn't that much of an expressive guy like that. He was kind of an old school guy from a very poor family, and that kind of work just didn't quite register with him.
Well, I'm glad it did for you, because you really are a definite big piece of history, really, for especially here in the lacrosse area, but in racing in general, with a lot of your contributions that you've done over the years. It's pretty impressive. It really is. I'm impressed about the hand lettering, and the hand cutting vinyl. That's nuts to me. And again, I can't tell you how many times I have looked at uh, ads over the past 4 or 5 decades and didn't realize that that was your handiwork. That's pretty cool.
No, thanks.
Of course. So what's on tap for you in this next year or so? Are you going to be doing some traveling? Are you going to be able to get to some racetracks? Are you going somewhere on a train? What you got going on, Dick?
I don't have anything planned, but I'm sure I'll start out by going to the Joe Shear race. I've been going there because Greg McCarnes is just a great friend of mine, and he was a I knew Greg when he was just a twinkle in his mother's eye. So I watched him grow up from being a teeny little kid to, and I'm just so proud of what he's accomplished. Him and Angie have accomplished down there.
Yeah.
You just can't help but support that.
Well, and he's cut from that same cloth as you as well too, where you jump in and you do what needs to be done. Whether it's dumping the garbage cans, fixing the plumbing, as you said, or the electrical to just get it handled. Um, yeah, that whole generation that grew up in racing in that heyday where you were at, they were a bunch of handlers that knew how to just get stuff done.
Yeah, and of course, I knew John and Sue McCarnes, and they were just wonderful people. when they retired, I stayed at their house 2 or 3 times when I made trips to Florida. And then I ended up after they both died the same year, and Greg and I went down to their house in Florida, and we spent a week sorting through John's racing stuff. It was just unbelievable
Whoa.
experience.
I bet that was. That man saved a lot of really cool memorabilia, and I bet he had amazing notes from every race he ever was at. What was the coolest thing that you came across?
Well, he was a secret Joe Shear fan, so he had just probably hundreds of Joe Shear photos that photographers had given him over the years.
Uh,
And
Hold on here, Dick. I'm gonna have to have you start over again because the computer froze up.
I seen that.
So we were talking about John McCarnes, and when you and Greg were down there, what was the coolest? What were the coolest things that you saw?
Well, he had all these photos and had hundreds really of Joe Shear photos, and we took most of those and put them in a box and gave them to his daughter. But when we got down there, the other thing that was just amazing and shocking, on his desk, he had just a big pile of papers. And, he wasn't in his last year, so he wasn't that agile. And he had papers with little post-it notes on them, say, well, call this guy and do this and all that. All these notes for him to do that he never was able to do. And you just had to go sort down through this pile of paperwork. It almost puts you in the tears because it was things that he really wanted to do that he couldn't.
Yeah. He had a very meticulous mind, and you were really blessed to be able to work with him for so many
He,
years.
he never stopped thinking about it. What if we did, even to me, he said, what if we did this? What if we did that? Can we do this different? And
Kind of sparks that creative in you as well, too, I bet. And he gets you kind of thinking about stuff. I bet that just gets your mind starting to roll as well. You're a creative guy as well, Dick.
well, I did one thing, and what they had was we were getting quite a few cars. You get 40 some cars, and making the feature is really hard. And we had, of course, like they do today, we had provisionals. Well, one of the problems with provisionals is if you get one provisional, that helps you get another one. And I came to him one day. I said, what if we had a deal where you could only get a provisional so many times? Because the guys, if they knew they were getting one, they wouldn't even go out and race the qualifying race. So we ended up with a deal where you started out the year with 2 provisionals, and after you've run 6 races, then you get another one. Then you run 6 more races, and you get another one. So those guys that are kind of on the borderline, then they had to fight their way in. And, I think that helped. You don't
Yeah,
like to see a car go out and run 2 laps for nothing. But
I
that's
agree.
one of the other things I did down at the Dells. We were getting like 40 some, what they used to call sportsmen, the Monte Carlo bodies with the 8-inch tires. And I never really cared for time trials. I know they're a necessity, but I thought they're boring. So I came up with a lineup system for that division where we didn't have time trials, and it was all built on points and point average. And then we had one deal where if you that we had the 8 guys with the highest points in the last 2 weeks automatically made the feature. So that in hopes of getting guys that might only race occasionally to come more often.
That's smart.
And it really was a good show. It was, I thought, I mean, it was, some people thought it was a little complicated to follow, but
If it
it
put
was,
on a good show, that's really all that matters, right?
and it saved some time. Then you can have, I'd rather see them out there practicing than timing. And then they don't, we weren't necessarily into having opening up the track real early in the day. So we wanted to keep it short as possible.
I think
Minimal.
that's something that's missing nowadays. I think that the race days sometimes just get drug out so much. And they could use maybe a Dick Johnson in there to try to help shape it up a little bit.
Well, I was the chief scorer for when they had the NASCAR Midwest Series for whatever night was that 98 through 206. And we'd go into a race. We got up before the sun came up to get to the track. We spend 18 hours at the track on race day.
That's some long hours.
And unfortunately, most of it you're standing around doing nothing. And
Yeah.
that's kind of when that series was kind of canceled. There was an opportunity to stay with NASCAR, but I didn't really want to do those kind of hours anymore. And all they had was an East and West series, and then you got to fly out and fly right back, and just wasn't going to be any fun. I was doing it because it was fun.
Yeah. If they'd been able to have you go by train, that might have been different, right?
Well, they wouldn't even let you go out and say fly back 2 days later. They said we're gonna buy you the ticket on that day, and that's it. So
Wow.
because then you could be a tourist for a couple of days and see the country. But
Hmm.
so I
What
hope
do
they're
you
not
hope?
listening.
What's that?
I hope they're not listening and put a hex on me.
I think you've got some solid ideas. I mean, when you're right there working in it, yeah, you got good ideas, Dick. You really do. You are just, I can't say it enough. I think if I'm going to put a title on this, it would be Dick Johnson, Renaissance Man, because you really had a lot of great ideas and you did a lot of contributions that people don't even realize that you did. So that being said, what is something, one or two things that you really hope people will always remember you for?
Well, certainly for being fair, and I tried to do what was best for the sport and for the driver. I mean, the drivers were my friends, I thought, most of them. But you have to draw the line eventually. One of the things that often bothers me is so many people that I met over the years know me, know my name, and unfortunately, I don't remember all their names. And I go to races and they say hi, Dick, and I think, oh, I know the face, but and I want to apologize for everybody for not remembering your name, but I don't know. I've never been good at remembering names, but I've met so many people. It's just hard to
Yeah.
keep them all up here.
Well, yeah, after over 43 years in racing, that's a lot of people and a lot of names to remember and a lot of good times too. A lot of good times. You are an amazing individual. I'm so glad that you took the time to be on the Racing Nuggets podcast with us. Do you have any final thoughts or stories that you want to share before we wrap things up?
Well, one thing that I did that I thought was really interesting at the time, for 2 years they ran a go-kart race in the lacrosse center, and I they invited me to be the chief scorer and on the planning committee, and we had to organize this thing and make it work. And so on race day, we had 200 entries in 7 divisions. We ran 64 racing events between 11 a.m. and 5 p.m. And it's
Wow.
everybody ran 2 heats, and the guys that needed to ran a last chance. And what you have to do is you take the results from the heats to make the next races, and you got to keep that flowing without, stopping, and because you can't have these people. We had a good crowd. It was on the Sunday between the last playoff race and the Super Bowl. So we had a good crowd, but you don't want them sitting there looking at nothing. So we just bang, 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 one race after another. So my job, I had 2 girls from the South Side go-kart track scoring. Had another guy, uh, Jeff Garbers. I brought him in to help. He was entering the data into a little computer database thing that I put together, and I was doing lineups from that. And hardly ever even saw the races. I'm doing nothing but lineups, 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 lineups. But it was such a good feeling to have that show go off the way it did. It's too bad that it couldn't have continued.
Yeah, I went to that. And it was a hell of a show. And I felt like it was really well run. And I have to be honest, I didn't even realize that you were that involved with that at the time. So that's even so many times in my life that I've seen something or have attended something that you've been involved in that I didn't even realize that you had a hand in it. And in many ways, a big hand in things. It's incredible.
Guy named Gary Thirk was the organizer. He raced hobby stock out here for a while, so I got to know him, and he invited me to help out. So that was just something totally different, and it turned out to be really cool.
Yeah, it really was cool. It really, really was. Well, Dick, thanks so much for being our guest on the Racing Nuggets podcast. I am proud to call you a friend, and I am even more honored to know even more about your history and what you really you made a lot of big contributions to the racing here in the Midwest. So um, I will never forget that you were the innovator for the post parties at Oktoberfest. I'll probably have one for you next time around. But you are an amazing character and definitely the colorful characters that we like to highlight here on the Racing Nuggets podcast. And I'm proud to have you be one of them. So thanks for agreeing to join us.
Yeah, this was fun. Excuse me. A lot of fun.
Well, I look forward to seeing you at a couple of different tracks here this year. And congratulations on an amazing, amazing history in racing here.
Yeah, thank you. I'm trying to keep my record going. I've been to every Oktoberfest race, so I hope I'm physically able to do it this year too.
Maybe they should have you design a sweatshirt, do the artwork this year.
No, no thanks.
No? Oh, I'd love to have a Dick Johnson original. Would you
No.
do it if they asked you?
Well, I'd give it a shot, but I'm not sure I'd make the cut.
Don't sell yourself short. Don't sell yourself short. Well, take care and thank you again for doing the Racing Nuggets podcast. God bless you, Dick.
Same to you.